And it's good to have you guys here. So if you guys can start by, I know you guys have been already introducing yourself, some of you guys. Great to meet you. Anna, glad to have you guys here. And if you guys will start by just putting in the chat where you're from, as well as what you would like to learn today, because I can go over a lot of different things, but the biggest thing that is most important in our time together is making this personal to you and helping you to the best of my capacity. So if you will put in the chat for me where you're from, what you want to learn today. And while you're doing that, I will intro the story about a client of mine. And hopefully, my intention with this story is it will, one, feel super personal to you guys. You'll understand what I'm talking about, that sort of thing. But then, secondly, the other thing I hope to get out of telling you this story is to raise questions, right? Because the whole point of this is to make this personal to you, to help you to the best of my capacity and our time together. So I'm going to tell you the story to help you kind of think about what would be most useful for you, because there's a lot of different ways we can go with our time today. So basically, a client of mine was going through, she was in a long-term relationship, was married for about 10 years, was with her partner for several years before that. And one of the things that started happening for her is she started feeling like she was like really drifting apart from her partner, right? So it's very, very common, of course, in these long-term partnerships. And as she was drifting apart from her partner, what was happening is she was finding other men and other women in her life, other confidants to confide in. And the cycle that wound up happening is as they started drifting apart, one of the things that came up later is the realization that they had different levels of attachment to each other with stress. And this happens a lot where one person in the relationship will have what's known as more of like an avoidant attachment style. And what winds up happening in those scenarios is during stress, somebody who has a tendency to have more of an avoidant attachment style will oftentimes withdraw and oftentimes go into their own personal caves to process things, and really is processing internally without talking much to their partner about it. And for whatever reason, oftentimes we have somebody with this avoidant attachment style paired, like with this client, with somebody with an anxious attachment style. Anxious attachment styles tend to have a little bit more of a tendency, as the name predisposes, to anxiety. And so, what can happen with that when somebody has more of a tendency to anxiety is they have a tendency then in these situations, like I'm talking about, to feel this sense of angst, to feel this like sense of like gonna lose a partner, like things are falling apart. They get really excitable, sometimes can get pretty excited in their language. And then oftentimes because the other person's avoidant, the anxious person will go off and start confiding in other people. And then that will make the avoidant person feel that withdraw even more. And so the vicious cycle continues. So how do we get out of this, and how do we work in these situations out of it? Well, I see in a lot of the work I do that libido and sexuality and intimacy and relationships, oftentimes we can divide this into three major overarching root causes. So one of the root causes really is physical, and this is where we get into things like hormones, stress, thyroid, sleep, nutrition, right? We even can get into, from the physical side, pelvic health, pelvic pain, how to make sure those muscles of the pelvic floor are working well. So we worked on physical stuff to make sure with this woman that there weren't any physical things going on, so that she could handle life and stressors in a way that was coming from resilience, right? And then there's two other major categories. One is the personal category. And then the third is the intrapersonal, how we relate to our partners. So, from a personal standpoint, a lot of things where we're doing is really learning more about our body and really determining for ourselves. Like one of the things I see so commonly, And one of the things I encourage you guys to do in this moment, I'm going to ask you a few questions. I encourage you guys to sit with us. So, one of the questions is the last time you had sex, like whenever that was, whether that was this week, this month, this year, 5 years ago, whenever it was, do you remember enjoying it? Right? Because one of the things that oftentimes will happen is people will not be engaging intimately because they're not getting something out of it. And some of this is because we've not been taught to have the right type of sex. And what I mean by that is there's a lot of different expressions of sexuality. And just like we have preferences in the kitchen with food, preferences with how we like to exercise, preferences what we do in our spare time, all of these types of things, there's a lot of different styles and taste. And there's like a lot of people have heard of the love languages book, right? Where there's all these different ways we express love through touch, through words, through acts of service, for example. And what's not talked about yet enough, and what I'm working to talk about a lot more, is the sex languages. And the sex languages really are related to what is our own personal style and how do we most enjoy sex and sexuality, right? And that's going to be extremely important from the standpoint of essentially what we're doing in the bedroom. So that's really important. So our sexual styles we absolutely want to pay attention to, right? And so that we learn some of that by experimenting, but also from this standpoint of what we do personally, like what we're doing from our standpoint of learning ourselves. There's a lot of things to be said here. So one of the things that we do when we're learning about ourselves is we are really beginning to say, okay, well, if we're self pleasure, right? If we're doing self pleasure and masturbation, when are you even doing that? And it's a really taboo topic. And it's a thing that is important to talk about because a lot of people are going into these relationships, like this client of mine, and there's this thing that can happen because of the porn industry, because of not being able to talk about this, where there's almost like this expectation that our partners are supposed to know what our likes and our preferences are. And one, it's very difficult because a lot of us don't even know ourselves. Like it took me a long time in my own history to learn like what's enjoyable and what's not. And talking to, clients of mine, sometimes people will say things. I'm like, that's so beautiful. That's enjoyable to you. For me, that would never work, right? Because we're all so different in our needs and preferences, just like everything else in our life. And so sometimes this level of like animosity and shame and guilt can come up interrelationally because we get into these cycles where it's so easy to feel like, okay, well, one person is not experiencing pleasure, right? Because the other person doesn't know what to do. And then there's that sense of like that person not knowing what to do. And there's this animosity or this subtle distance, right? Around like, oh, this person can't provide me pleasure, or this person's not doing this for me. And there's this subtle distance that can happen. And then, so some of the work in these three areas that really is important to grow intimacy, like I said, it's like the physical, the hormones, the stress, the pelvic floor health, is the ability to know oneself, know one's sexual style, know one's preferences, know what feels good. A lot of times, what will happen too in the personal side of things is we hold so much tension in our pelvis. And it's really interesting because in medicine, one of the areas that's commonly talked about is holding tension is actually in the jaw. So a lot of people wake up sometimes with jaw tension. You can even feel your jaw, like if you feel your jaw around where I'm feeling, for example. So I'm like pressing on the side part of my jaw by my ear. And if you feel your jaw here and you push a little bit, you might find like a little bit like ropey muscle, like where I'm at right now on my jaw, for those of you that are watching. I can feel this like little bit of ropey muscle, right? That's really, really common to hold tension in our jaw. And oftentimes when we sleep, we can get this jaw pain. Well, what's interesting, it's not talked about a lot, is another common way that when our body is holding stress and tension, that we hold this is actually in our pelvic floor. And in medicine, one of the things that we were actually taught in school is this saying like as above so below, meaning oftentimes that things that are occurring in like the upper part of the neck and the jaw, there's almost this identical occurrence in the pelvis and sacrum. So basically by the pelvis I mean by like your hip bones and all those muscles in there. So it's very, very common and not talked about a lot that will hold tension in our pelvic floor and in those pelvic floor bowls. And so sometimes what this translates to is like pain with sex. Sometimes it can be numbness. Sometimes it can be pain around the vaginal entrance, right? So all of this pain can come up. And one of my colleagues is the founder of the sex massager company called Mystery Vibe, and I love what they're doing over there. And this is like, it's just phenomenal what we can do by learning to heal ourselves. Because, and part of the reason I'm so passionate about educating around this is because it's not a lot of places you can find this kind of information from a medical and health perspective, right? So it's like pleasure, but it's also medicine. And so one of the things this company is finding that this sex vibrator use that is used 3 times a week for a total of 12 weeks has a 5 times reduction in pelvic pain. And what we're doing with this is we're actually learning how to relax these muscles, kind of like the jaw muscles, but now I'm talking about the muscles of the pelvis. And once these muscles learn how to relax, because oftentimes with Kegels and these things that we're taught to do to like strengthen things, oftentimes what winds up happening is we wind up over strengthening these muscles, and the muscles work in a way where they need to be strong, but they need to relax. Like if our bicep is constantly holding tension, or we're constantly clenching our jaw, right, it hurts because our muscles are supposed to contract, they're supposed to get stronger and relax. And so one of the things that often happens is the pain is coming from the standpoint, or the numbness is coming from the standpoint, or the lack of pleasure is coming from the standpoint of these muscles not really relaxing. And so what by using these types of toys, what they do from a personal standpoint is they actually are we're putting sensation, we're putting like this vibration in different parts of our vulva, different parts of our vaginal tract, different parts of the pussy, which I use that word very cautiously because it had a lot of negative connotation. But when it comes down to it, the vagina is just the tube. And then there's all of these other components of the tube, right? There's all these other components of sexuality and erotic tissue. And frankly, there's not a medical word for all of that. So that's where like a lot of people in the field are using words like pussy, because it's really about all of that area. It's not about this bad thing. It's about the clitoris. It's about the vulva. It's about the vagina. It's about the cervix area. It's about all of this erotic tissue and all of the pelvic floor muscles that are connected there. And so when we're using a toy like that, we're actually teaching our brain, literally our brain, we're teaching our brain to connect to that tissue again and repair that connection, so that when we tell that pelvic floor to relax, to feel pleasure, to enjoy, that it really is able to do that. And that's where we start getting into, so I said physical, I said personal, right? And then interpersonal. And so the link between the physical and the personal oftentimes is once we begin to repair this muscle and repair these tissues, then that's where we can start getting into orgasms and pleasure and all those types of things. And when that comes in, that's where we get oxytocin. That's where we balance stress. Right. So a lot of the work I do in my courses and in my education, and the people that choose to work with me, is largely about combining step-by-step actions to actually heal the physical, to figure out what's going on, hormone imbalance, to figure out your pelvic floor health, step-by-step personal, to understand your likes, your needs, your preferences, all those things. And then third, step-by-step interpersonal, because one of the biggest things is once we start understanding our likes and needs, and if we're attached, what our attachment style is, whether it's anxious, avoidant, or secure, we want to then start to communicate with our partner in an effective way. And one of the things that I think is super important to understand, it's so easy to get into these states where like men and women, we just like miss the boat, right? And that's been going on, for that this conversation's been going on for years. It's like, the famous book, Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus, like talked about, it was like been talked long before that. People like Alison Armstrong are talking about this from a standpoint of understanding men and women, but medically, a lot of what we talk about, and I talked about this on my webinar the other day, so I'm just going to mention this briefly, is that the way testosterone acts on the brain is different than the way estrogen acts on the brain, meaning different parts of the brain will actually get more blood flow if we're testosterone dominant versus estrogen dominant. Right. And so that's what's really important, because different parts of the brain have different functions. This is why men and women see things and hear things in different ways. This is why a woman oftentimes can leave a bag of trash by the door on the way, thinking like, oh, my honey's going to go out to work, or he's going to go on an errand, and he'll like take the trash out. And then all of a sudden she goes by the door and honey left and the trash is still there. And in a woman's brain, it's oftentimes like, holy crap, I have to do everything. Right. And there's that break. And in the man's brain, it's like, I was just focused on getting to work. Right. And it's not, there's no more meaning to it than the way the blood flows to a man brain is like to a point that's making him really, really, really focused. So if the job is take the trash out, he's focused on that. If the job is to get to work, he's focused on that. Women's brain very different. Women has this brain where like the blood lights the brain up in different ways, so there's this diffuse awareness, which is why like with children, women can have a conversation with their friend, be cooking their dinner, hear the baby crying in another room, and realize that the couch is disheveled all at the same time, right? Because that's how things light up differently. So then when we communicate, we have to think about how to break down the step-by-step of communication. So the way the blood is flowing to a man's brain and the way that blood is flowing to a woman's brain, we can actually get on the same page. And that's where the interrelational work comes in. So that's kind of my opening speech. And so in the client that I'm talking about, that's, the way I work with this particular client was similar to everything we're talking about. It was like getting the hormones in alignment, getting the pelvic floor therapy in alignment, right? Then the second thing is going to be saying, okay, well, let's work on our personal. And the third is the action steps to communicate then about everything we've learned in a way that we're going to be heard, understood, and understand our partner. And in this particular client, it's like after 13 years of being together, kind of been married, then all of a sudden she was able to have amazing babies. They have 2 twin babies. They're doing really great. They have a third on the way. So now they're like super happy. Everything is great. They're in this amazing, cute little town in Washington, D.C. And, that's all come from like not needing to get, their closeness now has come from not needing to get the validation to the level from their community, because they're actually talking and communicating together and getting their needs met. So I'm going to go through some of the questions now. I'm also going to put in, so please, you guys, keep asking questions, because again, the purpose of this webinar is about you and about getting your needs met here. So let me go through these questions and comments. And so I'm also putting in here my 21-day Libido Jumpstart course. So I want you to make sure you guys have that. That's the most actionable way to get the information I'm talking about today, because when we're talking about physical, personal, interpersonal, there's a lot we can say, right? So in the physical, right, we have sex hormones, we have nutrient deficiencies, we have sleep, we have pelvic floor, we have stress hormones, we have all these different areas that we need to test and treat and bring into balance, as well as day-to-day action steps and lifestyle. And that's true for all of these different areas. So it's very difficult to teach, and it's not just difficult, it's impossible to teach that much stuff and apply it in one webinar. So that's why I have this 21-day jumpstart where we go through all of these different things, and then we have calls on each of these areas to basically go through the action steps. So that's where you can get the most bang for your buck as far as applying this. And also that particular program also comes with lab testing. So we get we lab test at in your home. We lab test via saliva. So we essentially do your sex hormones, DHEA. We do cortisol, which is stress hormone, another stress hormone a lot of people aren't testing for, cortisone, and all of that done just by a salivary test in the comfort of your own home. And then we, teach you, like, what do the tests mean? What do you do about them? Right? What do you do lifestyle? What do you do supplements? How do you get out of stress? How do you get into hormonal balance? And so all of that is taught in there. And with the lab tests, these are lab tests that I do not see people being like ordering easily from standard medicine. Because another thing we test for in the desired course that I put in there, this is going to be related to some of the questions regarding hormone therapy, is we test for 3 different types of estrogen: E1, E2, and E3. There's 3 types of estrogen, and they all do different things in the body. And a lot of times when people are just testing for estrogen, they're just testing for a total. And you could have a perfectly normal total level, but all of a sudden there was a if you test for your total level, sorry, I got distracted by a question. If you test for your total level, you're missing the E1, E2, E3, right? So if you're missing the E1, E2, E3, the levels, what might happen is you might be a high level of an estrogen called E2, but you might not have a lot of E3, different type of estrogen. E3 is an amazing estrogen for keeping the vagina moist, right? For supporting and helping you with vaginal dryness. So that's what's really important, is understanding these different types of estrogen and getting a sense of, do you have enough of all of them? Because you could have a total amount that's fine, but low of one of these types. And that can make a big difference with the recommendations of how to bring you back to balance. And when it comes to these estrogens and it comes to things like pelvic pain, you want to make sure you have a balance of all of these, right? Because they all will make a difference. The other big thing is circulation. So a lot of people don't realize that low libido is one of the top leading factors of an early sign of a cardiovascular disease. Another reason I'm so passionate about this is because cardiovascular disease is the #1 leading cause of death worldwide. And low libido is an early warning sign of that. And oftentimes people aren't realizing this is a symptom of other health situations. So that's another thing we talk about in our course, is like, what do we do about circulation? And that's also hugely related to pelvic pain, is once you get the blood going back to that tissue appropriately, that's another thing that can help with pelvic pain. So we combine things like the mystery vibe with some of the tools for circulation, for example. So definitely check out that course. I think it'll really, really help you guys and add so much to you. And we get a lot more time together. And I really like spending a lot of time with all of you. Okay, so then as far as how old is too old to start hormone therapy, there's no age that's too old to start hormone therapy, but what we see in research is starting hormone therapy within the first 5 years, especially after menopause, and up to the first 10 is where we get the most benefit. So we're never really too old to start it. There's still benefit that can be derived, right? It can still help with things like libido. It can still help with things like anti-aging. It can still help you make you feel better in your body. But truly, the most benefit we see is the earlier we start. So I'm in my mid-40s. I'm in the middle of like the early onset of perimenopause. I'm going through that early onset of hot flashes. And I can tell you, in my mid-40s, I'm getting my hormones tested about every 6 months, right? Is what I'm doing. It's another reason why I'm offering this in the program, right? Is I want you guys to have these baselines wherever you're at, because it's important to start regulating and testing this. Because what I'm doing for myself is, like, every 6 months, I test my hormones, because I want to know exactly that point where I am starting to change my hormones, right? I'm seeing like tiny little changes in progesterone, for example, tiny little changes in estrogen. I'm not doing a ton of therapy. I'm just doing tiny little doses right now just to be supportive. But I'm really looking for that point where I have that much major change. Something is clearly changing because I'm getting perimenopausal symptoms in a lot of different ways. But I'm really looking at that hormone balance and measuring that specifically and tracking it, because the earlier we get this balanced and the earlier you start on HRT, hormone replacement therapy, using natural versions, there's very natural versions or bioidentical versions, which just means they're structurally similar. They like look, if you were looking at the chemical molecule of what our body produces as far as like say estrogen, and then you get on a natural or bioidentical, that chemical molecule is basically going to be the same. That's what that means. And so essentially, if we do that, then what we're doing is we are giving our body that information, that support that it needs. And if we're starting that like when we're going into peri or at that first 5, hopefully by 10 years into menopause, then we're getting the most benefit. But the sooner you can get it to the hormone change, the better. Now, some of you guys are, on my list and tracking my work. Some of you guys are going to be in your, 60s, 70s, and even 80s. And so it's not too late to do that. But for those of you that are listening in your 30s, 40s, 50s, this is when it's like we want to really do that. 30s, obviously, hopefully you're not going through menopause or perimenopause, but that's the time to start balancing stress hormones, start looking at your hormones to make sure everything is as balanced as possible, so that when you get to that perimenopause stage, like I am, you are pretty regulated, right? You're not having crazy. It's like maybe there's something that's a little off, but you're going to go through it a lot easier and a lot quicker and a lot smoother, and you're going to have better bone health and brain health, and it's not going to feel almost like those teenage years again, which it can feel like for some women when it's like confidence and self-esteem and acne and all the things they can get haywire, and all of that can be avoided. And the sooner we start working on that, frankly, the easier it is. So that's my thought on hormone therapy. And V, thank you so much for the mystery vibe comment. I'm so glad that you have one of those. The Crescendo 2 by them, they have several products, but the Crescendo 2 is my absolute favorite. That's the one they're doing the most research on for women. They have the Tenuto 2 for men. That one's an amazing product for men. It also has been shown to really help with prostate health. So that's something, to make sure men know about. And for all the ladies on the call, just definitely know that there's like a great male product out there too that can help with prostate health. They're using it for a lot of times to help with BPH and some of their clinical trials for post prostate cancer support, and finding really good results in their trials. They've trialed all over the world. It's such a cool company, and I really like, one of my passions personally is combining pleasure and interrelationships, because for me, my one of my biggest core values is my people, my community. Like that's nothing is probably more important in this world than family, friends, and community. And so a way that we can have with our work, where we can see that pleasure, not even sexual pleasures, pleasure in general, oxytocin in general, hugs, laughing with friends, is actually coming back and connecting with health. Anytime we can do that, and mystery vibe from a sex toy perspective is like brilliant at really combining pleasure and health. And when we combine those things, I just think it's incredible. So it is the Crescendo that you have, Bee. Perfect. And some of the things to start with as far as using it. I mean, one is making sure that you are always. I would definitely recommend using a lubricant with it. And this will, I know that we have a question too around lube. So as far as lubricant with silicone toys, and most sex toys are going to be silicone these days. There's glass, there's other materials. Silicone is one of the safest. Glass is very safe too, but we want to be very careful about what we're actually inserting, because anything we can insert, like the vaginal mucosa, is really, really porous, right? We can absorb toxins. So we want to be careful about what we're putting in there, because we don't want to put toxins on our body, because that is another cause of low libido. It's a cause of brain fog, fatigue, a lot of other things. And so I would definitely encourage you with, use of the Crescendo to use a lubricant. Anytime you're using a silicone-based toys, the best lubricants are going to be water-based. Definitely, most importantly, avoid silicone toys with silicone lube. That combination will actually break down the toy. So you ever want to use silicone on silicone. So I really like a lube for silicone toys called Sliquid, which I just put in there. They have a few different ones. So make sure you get the water-based one, right? And so if you get the water-based liquid with the silicone toy, that's your best bet. And then I would encourage you initially, when using that, like one of the initial things, and again, I go through all of this in my course, but just to give you some starting initial steps, is starting with whatever sensation feels comfortable to you, right? Some of these toys and the crescendo is amazing. It has so many different options. It's highly customizable for you to figure out your pleasure, which works really, really well in kind of the stage where you're learning about your body. But initially, oftentimes for many women, one of the things is actually getting their pelvis to start relaxing, to start healing any numbness. A lot of times we hold trauma, in that area, especially if there's any sort of, sexual abuse history, but even emotional trauma, right? Like, even if, like, you're with a partner, for example, that really loves and cares about you and you have a solid relationship, sometimes people say things to us in these ways where it's like there's emotional hurt there, right? And we can store that emotional hurt oftentimes neurologically in our pelvic floor. Remember, it's that tightening I'm talking about. You know how you get, sometimes when we get like upset, our jaw, we can clench our jaw. So again, we can clench our pelvis. And so sometimes we can hold this emotional memory in that pelvis. And so one of the first steps in using something like the crescendo, oftentimes it's going to be using something like that water-based lubricant and slowly inserting the device. You can actually warm the outer erotic tissue, like the clitoris up, so just holding it there. And one of the first things I would recommend in using a toy like this, one, to repair the tissue and to reset that neurological programming, is to insert the toy into a certain position and literally hold and breathe, right? Just hold the toy there. The first stages with repairing the tissue there, supporting pelvic pain, and also getting away numbness. The first step is that neurological reset, where we're allowing that tissue in the brain to find that tissue. And what we're doing from a physical standpoint, in part, is we're actually bringing blood back to that tissue. Sometimes there's that numbness because where our blood is not flowing to that tissue anymore, which happens when there's, emotional trauma or a holding of that tissue, right? So we're actually bringing blood back to that tissue. And so what you're looking for, and you're just almost on this like this very, very gentle journey of self exploration. And one of the things in this exercise, and I'm going to say this, I'm going to say this cautiously. This is why I like to go deeper with this material in my coursework, because one of the things we have to be really careful about is when we're doing these exercises initially, one of the things that can happen is we can have memories, come back up, and we might start crying. I've seen situations where women cry from this. I've seen situations where women will like spontaneously laugh for no reason. Sometimes it's joy. Sometimes it's like this feeling of like devastation, right? There's so many things that can happen with this. So I really encourage you when you're doing this to go slowly and to just figure out, okay, hold and breathe and allow this tissue and just breathe into that tissue looking for numb spots, and and have something like 3 times a week as a good baseline. That's where the research says that we get some of the most repair and the improvement. And from a standpoint of like too much, like allow yourself, like if something comes up emotionally around it, we want to allow ourselves like the time to actually process what that is without guilt, without judgment. Sometimes we don't even know. I've seen so many times for myself as well as other people I worked with where it's like, okay, well, holding this spot, and maybe there's all these tears that come out and all this emotion, and it's like we don't always know why. And it doesn't matter from a standpoint of healing. We don't have to always know why to heal it, but we want to allow our nervous system time to integrate that new way of being. So I definitely encourage you to go slow, but that's an initial thing I would start doing is just using that lubricant, going slow, holding and breathing. And then, like I said, if you want more support and step by step actions of how to really use toys like that to help tonify the pelvic bowl, to help prevent things like incontinence, to have more pleasure, to heal numbness, to have better sex and orgasms. We go through all of that in the desired course. So please, please, please sign up for that. Okay, so oh, you're welcome. Oh, good. I'm so glad you guys are looking at the Tenuto as well. Yes, awesome. Yeah, I hope you join, Vivi. There's so much we can talk more about, and I would love to have more time to chat with you about all of this. Super important, and thank you so much for all your comments. I'm going to go over to this one in the Q&A because this one was next. So, from somebody that's anonymous, well, thank you for your anonymity. It's important to follow that. You attended my libido seminar, and there was a recommended lubricant, so vaginal tissue thinning. So, as far as vaginal tissue thinning, it's actually less of like a lubricant and more of a supplement that is used topically on the vulva. So it's DHEA, and you want to get one that is a topical lube. And if you go to, so it's a topical, as a sorry, so say DHEA, it's a liquid, is how you really say it. And basically, you're going to use it on the vulva. So what I was sharing with that is like it's actually DHEA is a precursor to estrogen and testosterone. Very, very, very safe. And it is huge for helping relieve thinning tissue, really good for atrophy. And you actually get, you can take it internally, and that's lovely. And it does a lot of things that helps with muscle growth and anti-aging. And it can help orally with some of the vaginal lining. But what is going to help the most is if you actually apply it on the vulva. So just between like the bigger lip, the bigger labia, and the smaller one, that's where you're going to actually apply it between the bigger and smaller lip of the vulva. And so, and if you go to, I'm going to give you my link here because I have a store where you can get a lot of really, really good products. And so I'm constantly, as I find more products, I'm putting them in my store for you guys. But the biggest thing to always remember is I create a store in part. There's a lot of reasons, but one of them is because not all the products on the market are the same. And there's so many products where the inert ingredient is toxic. And there's also studies out there that have been done. Like there was a study on magnesium, for example, where this researcher pulled magnesium from a lot of the over the counter places in stores and actually found that some of these magnesium labeled supplements had literally no magnesium inside of them, or they had different milligrams amounts that are on the bottle. And so you can find DHEA in a lot of different over the counter places, but I would really encourage you to be very careful about where you buy stuff like this because the last thing that I want people to do is one, spend money on something that doesn't have anything inside of it that's supposed to because supplement market is unregulated. And then the second thing I don't want to happen is for you to be putting something, especially on your vulva, that is so sensitive to toxins. I don't want you to put anything on there that can actually be problematic, that can have toxins in it, that could irritate the tissues. And so everything in my store is you won't find like a crazy amount of products in there, just very, very specific products that I have vetted, that I have used, that I have researched, that I've talked to the owners of the company, that I've gotten their quality analysis, that I've looked at their toxic, like when they run their labs through third or their supplements through third parties to look to see their toxic load to make sure there's no toxins in them. You know, like I said, because especially with something like the vulva, I just want to make sure you're putting really, really, really good stuff on there. So, oh, and you're welcome, Anna. I'm so glad you're here. So I hope whoever is wrote that vaginal tissue thinning thing, I hope that helps. Write me another comment if that's not helpful. But I think that's what we were talking about that you're referring to. Okay, and then Debbie talking about breast cancer 2 times, estrogen dependent estrogen blockers. So not about to take estrogen. Well, here's something that I really encourage you to do. So it's this topic is so sensitive, especially when you've gone through, cancer and all the scariness about that, that 6 letter word. So scary. And it's so scary on oneself. It's so scary in the family. I've had, family members pass from breast cancer. So, I've been fortunate to never have it, but I know from a familial standpoint, at least from watching family members pass, like what that, it is a tender place in my heart is I guess what I'm saying here. And one of the things that I really encourage you to do is the research around estrogen causing cancer is not correct. And what's not correct about it is how the studies that it's basically estrogen does not cause breast cancer. And I know that's like a shocking thing to hear. And I don't expect you to take my word for it after you've heard this from an oncologist. But what I do encourage you to do is read a book called Estrogen Matters and get that book and talk to your doctor about what you learned from the book, talk to your oncologist. Because what that book does is it goes through all of the studies that where oncologists got this estrogen is bad, and it's actually telling you how the researchers manipulated the data to actually show that it was a problem when it's not, and it goes through the research of like how the data was manipulated incorrectly. It goes through study. I mean, there must be 20 studies that this woman goes through in great detail, being like, this is what we see with estrogen and breast cancer. And so it's really, really scary. And maybe you're not even willing to do that, but I want to at least put that out there for you for something to consider, because I think it's one of the biggest things that have hurt women these days is a misunderstanding of that research. And I really don't feel like I'm doing my job without telling you to at least consider that. So that's my soapbox there. But regardless of that, I want to make sure, even if you're like, you just feel too scared to do that, I totally understand, because cancer is scary as heck. So let's look at some of the other things. So you're saying surgical cuts have cut your interest in sex, not a body issue. Peripheral neuropathy, diabetic, well controlled, taking gabapentin, used to smoke pot, made you horny, but now it made you feel pain in the hands and not much pleasure, put you on Prozac. And now it's just making you pee with low stream. Having insertion the last 2 times having sex felt like too fast and hurt. Tried self-pleasuring pain and use the VFit, haven't felt any, no particular, just thank you. First of all, Debbie, now that I read your whole thing, thank you for sharing all this. It's one of the things I really, really do in my work, and that's like, yeah, I think this is like you writing this is actually like the foundational reason why I do and I work in the way I do. I'm actually feeling a little teary, because I think it's just so frustrating to me how there's just not good avenues and safe spaces to talk about this as women. Um, it's like really the fundamental reason I'm so passionate about this is just finding spaces where we can actually, as women, come, like you're saying, like no particular question, just feel good to write about this, and to have places where we can come together as women and be understood and be listened to and validated. And it's just, I just think it's so important. So thank you for your vulnerability. Thank you for feeling safe on this channel to being vulnerable. I know you have no questions. Another thing I would say, in addition to considering that book, and if it doesn't feel right, to you, I totally understand. But other things just to consider if you feel like, okay, this is right to continue on the path you're on. I think as far as, trying to self-pleasuring, there's definitely good reason to do that, because even when you're saying like, okay, insertion on sex too fast is like really hurting. I like one of the first things I would start to do is literally just focus on the exterior. And I mean that in every way. So I mean, considering something like DHEA might still scare you. DHEA I've seen to be incredibly safe for, post-cancer scenarios, right? Take anything in a cancer scenario to your oncologist, but of course, I would also take that book to your oncologist. But I would consider using something like DHEA topically for that. If that does not, if that's something that does not feel good to you from the standpoint of like post breast cancer, a CBD type of salve can really help that tissue. Another thing that I've seen to be helpful is a product called C60, Carbon 60. And C60 is a particular type of oil. It's similar to like a coconut oil, but it has even more anti-inflammatory properties, and it doesn't have the antimicrobial effects of a coconut oil. We really want to be careful about using coconut oil like on our vulva and intravaginally because it is so antimicrobial. And since it's so antimicrobial, we can actually throw off the probiotics, that those good bacteria in the vagina. And when we throw those off, that can lead to pain, right? So that C60 is almost like it's like similar to coconut oil with all of the anti-inflammatory effects, but not the antimicrobial effects. So you protect that intravaginal area better. So that's really important there. And so I would definitely consider doing something like that. Another thing that I would absolutely consider is just literally like cupping your hands and just holding them outside, just like literally on like the lightest touch outside the labia and just breathing into that area. Another thing you can even consider with something like the crescendo or V-fit, like you have another, or like you can use this with any sort of like vibratory type of device, is literally taking it and on that outer lip, the labia majora, you're like literally putting that vibrator on different places and just almost like what I was explaining with the crescendo, doing it just on the outside. And then I would also make sure, like another couple huge areas would be one, working on the circulation and really supporting the circulation and the circulation there. Obviously, like with that history of diabetes, it sounds like it's managed, but when you're telling me you have peripheral neuropathy, I think that's hugely related because we can have peripheral neuropathy in our vulva, right? So like vulvodynia, pain of the vulva, there's several different reasons for having it, but one is neuropathy, the other is blood flow. And there's others beyond that, but the second is blood flow. And so when you're saying like, okay, there's probably a diabetic issue with that. I know that type 2 has been well controlled, but there still might be a neurological problem for a neurological reason for why that tissue is sensitive there. So I would say, I know it's controlled, but really working on circulation there. And controlled is always like a questionable word in medicine when I hear people say that because it's like we're often told it's controlled from a standpoint of like conventional medicine, but we can have conventional medicine problems and our body in conventional medicine can say you're fine because you're in this like range what we consider normal. Well, the range of normal and the range of optimal are different. So our blood sugar can be controlled, it can be in this normal range, but it might not still be optimal. And if it's not optimal, then what winds up happening is we do not have that same level of control. So essentially, like insulin, which is the hormone that helps to get sugar inside of our cells, right? And so insulin, if you test it in conventional medicine, they say insulin can go up to 24 and be fine. But what we see from an optimal standpoint is insulin's optimal between about 2 and 5, maybe all the way up to 10. So you can have a level of 12, 13, 14, 15 of insulin and been told that you're in control, but you could still have your nerves being affected because of a blood sugar issue, leading to something like vulvodynia, pain in the vulva. So the point is like I would really just be cautious when it's like some of these things are in control because normal and optimal are different, and you can have normal levels of something but still have symptoms related to certain things being not optimal. And I definitely suspect that is part of the problem. So, oh goodness, I hope you will join me in my 21-day jumpstart as well. Because even though, even if you don't want to touch like the sex hormone components of things, getting stress hormones regulated, getting thyroid regulated, getting blood sugar regulated, helping with circulation, all of those things can really, really support you on this journey. So, thank you so much again, Debbie. I feel it in my heart, and I hope you will join me for more. Okay. We have a few minutes left. We have about 10 minutes left. I'm here for you guys. So if you guys are done with questions, that's what I have for you guys today. Do you guys have any more questions for me? Okay, while you're thinking, I'll definitely let you know. Another thing is I have only 9 spots left, so filling up for the 21-day thing. So definitely it starts, the launch date for that is January 22nd. So it's a combination of videos, of lab tests from your own house. Again, we go through physical, we go through personal, we go through interrelational. So we teach you about hormones, teach you about how to test your hormones, about stress, about pelvic floor health, about how to find your own pleasure, about what your sexual style is, about how to heal from any guilt or shame around sex, around how to communicate better, around self esteem, confidence, all of those different types of things. The goal is in 21 days, give you a huge jump start to all three of these areas. So we do it through videos, lab tests, and live Q&A calls, giving you actionable steps every step of the way. So you're going to have actionable steps to do almost every day throughout this, with a couple of days off here and there to integrate. So that's basically coming up there. I have a few more bonus spots. So I have 5 more bonus spots available. The bonus spots gets access to a library of 4 other deep dive calls that are about an hour to hour and a half, where we go through in deeper ways topics like menopause, topics like communication, topics like, I have one called Hack the Mind. And Hack the Mind, we go through, and it's an exercise, it's a 30-day exercise actually, where you go through and you figure out what sort of subconscious thoughts you're having, because a lot of us have these subconscious thoughts that are driving things. Like, I see a lot of self-conscious thoughts when I do these exercise examples of things that will come up is, I'm not worthy of pleasure, or pleasure is not safe, or pleasure is wrong, or for people that are super inflamed, I will never heal, or I'm not beautiful, or all these different things come up, right? And I can tell you personally, I've had a lot of the things that I've said that I just shared in that have come up for me when I've done these exercises. So I teach you how to go through and find any sort of subconscious thoughts that are actually driving some ways that you're actually responding to the world and showing up in the world. So that's a bonus. So those are all bonuses for, I have 5 of those bonus spots left and 10 spots left in the course. So that's more about the course. And like I said, it starts on the 22nd of January. So you have a little bit of time to get oriented. If you are worried about, like, oh, what if I can't attend any of the Q&As live? I have a solution for that, which is in the course. There is a discussion group. And so if you post your questions in the discussion group, I love when people show up live. So if you can show up live, please show up live. It's really great for community building. But if it's just not possible for you to show up live, then if you post your questions in the discussion forum in the course, I go through those as well when I'm on the live calls to say, okay, well, is anybody not here that needs their questions answered? And then the recordings are posted. And the other thing is that you will have access to all of the course material, even though it's a 21-day course. I give everybody access to the material. I guarantee 3 months. A lot of times it lasts longer. I just like to make sure that in case my life goes a different direction for some weird reason, I have a guarantee point. So you'll have at least 3 months guaranteed to go through the course. So if you're like, oh, it's not the best time for me to start, sign up anyways, just get in there, post your questions, and then if it's better for you to go through it in a couple time periods, and then let me know. So this is my first time offering this particular 21-day jumpstart in this format. So it may be offered again, it may not be, I'm not really sure. So it could be a one-time opportunity, and truthfully, that might not be true at all. I don't know yet. So know that opportunity is there. And yeah, I think that's really it. The lab tests are done in the comfort of your own home. They're mailed to you. They're super easy. We can get them mailed to just about any state except for the state of New York. We can get them mailed over in almost any country overseas. There's a few exceptions. So if you're living in a different country and you're interested in this, just definitely shoot us an email. But most of these we can get shipped out internationally even. So if that's something that you need to know, you can reach us at support@platinumself. So that's our email. And then I'll post this link for you one more time. And that's really what I have for you today. So thanks again, everybody, for your time, for showing up, for being vulnerable. All of it is super, super, super valuable. I really appreciate you all being here. I hope you have a great Sunday, and I'm wishing you the best in your pleasure, your relationships, and everything. So I hope to see you all in the future real, real soon. All right. Take care, everybody.